Hello and welcome to the Brew Hoop podcast. I'm Adam Paris, co-managing editor of brewhoop.com, freshly returned from the beautiful beaches of Puerto Rico. Thank you to Riley and Kyle for covering for me last week. That was quite a treat, and love the pod as well. Big fan, first time, long time listener, first time host, and thank you guys for joining me as usual. It's Riley and Kyle are back this week. And how are you guys? How are you guys doing? It was kind of a tough week for the Bucks. We had two losses.
It's a good question. I think it might have been the toughest 7-day stretch of the entire season if you're also including the Hornets game from last Sunday, which was just, an eyesore completely. But otherwise, I'm feeling pretty good. My first Sunday delivery of the newspaper I subscribed to, it actually showed up today, even though they had only gotten like 1 out of the 7 deliveries previously. So I'm in a good mood. I'm looking forward to reading that after this, which is totally lame, but that's where I'm at in life.
Okay, wait, Kyle. Before we move on, I'm curious about this, Riley. What's your your living situation? How is the paper delivered? Because I'm guessing you don't live in like a full house, right?
No. So I live in an apartment building, but it's not like a big one with like a ton of units. It's like 8 units, pretty basic house. We're just north of the University of Minnesota's campus, so sort of student living. How it's delivered, I have no freaking clue. So this is not the Star Tribune, it's the Times, and so I'm assuming they have a contractor locally that they have to go to, and it's just kind of hit or miss whether or not that contractor actually picks up and or delivers. And I've had them try to reschedule deliveries every single day. It just does not show up. So I'm assuming it's just they don't have enough people. I'm too out of the way because God knows there's not a single other student near the university that's subscribing to a physical newspaper. So what it should do is they should just throw it to the front steps of the building. So the options are either they're not doing that, they're not delivering, or somebody's jacking it every single morning, which would be really quite a bit of a downer. But now that I've gotten it twice, I can't imagine that's actually the case. So,
okay. I had a professor in college who made me subscribe to the Times for his class for a semester.
Was that like your required textbook, essentially?
Yeah. I don't remember much from that class. It wasn't that helpful. Kyle, how are you doing?
Oh, what a week. What a week. For those that don't know, I was temporarily suspended on Twitter, which I don't know how I managed to do that. Out of all the tweets, though, it's because they called a racist a female dog, a certain body part, and a coward. And I said it 3 times, and I guess it's kind of like Beetlejuice. Once you say, or Candyman, once you say it 3 times, that's enough, and you get axed. So it was kind of nice. It was kind of nice not having to be on Twitter and social media. And I'm really glad because I'm sure I would have lost my collective shit on the Los Angeles Lakers game. But otherwise, I'm now tranquil. I'm back on Twitter for better or worse, I guess, and still watching a lot of soccer.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same, And, speaking of things sort of changing, sort of staying the same, the Milwaukee Bucks kick off this last week. Thankfully, you guys recorded late last Sunday, so we didn't have to talk about the Charlotte game again this week. Thank you.
Well, we talked about it, but
yeah. I am so glad that I didn't have to talk about it. Bucks kick off this week then with a 105-89 loss at Miami, pretty roundly defeated and soundly defeated by a Miami Heat team that shot 48.6% from 3, 18 of 37. Bucks shoot just 7 of 34 from deep, 20.6%. Hat tip to Dean Maniat, always the outlier police in terms of 3-point shooting. Anything over 45.2% and under 25.2% he lists as outliers. This was obviously outlier on both sides of the coin. Giannis just 13 points, 15 rebounds, 6 of 18 from the floor. Chris is a similarly troubling night, 12 points, 4 of 16 from the floor. Brook Lopez was really one of the few players who was able to find his offensive groove in that one. 21 points, 8 of 16 from the floor. And George Hill, of course, got nailed in the balls by Goran Dragic. So that was a tough couple of losses on the night, and he's been out for the last couple games since then. But this was one of those games, Riley, where beyond Giannis kind of getting locked up by Bam Adebayo, it felt to me like, yeah, this is the kind of script that you could see if the Bucks really shoot this poorly and a team shoots this well. This loss felt similar, as opposed to the Lakers game that we're going to talk about a little later. This loss felt basically on script with the other losses we've seen from the Bucks this year.
Yeah, there were a couple of different factors you could go into it and use as discounters. Like, it was the second game on a back-to-back. I'm assuming that the Bucks rushed willy-nilly out of Charlotte to get to Miami to enjoy South Beach a little bit. That's just an assumption. I don't know that for a fact, but if I was to guess, and then like you're saying, when you have those outlier shooting nights, it kind of all adds together. But the one thing that I would say that, you already kind of outlined Giannis struggling. Chris also struggled, 4 of 16 from the floor, only 2 of 10 from 3. He ended up with 12 points. What was interesting to me and kind of made me look a little bit or feel a little bit like an idiot, maybe not so much, but after that Charlotte game where it was like, we're just going to go through Giannis. He was doing so much on the high post, like busting out all these moves. And we spoke in the immediate aftermath about the fact that Charlotte just probably didn't have necessarily the personnel to keep him locked up. And in this situation against the Heat, I think their defensive personnel, because of their length, the relatively stout, like you said, with Bam Adebayo, he's a tough matchup. And then Jimmy Butler too, when he's really tuned in on defense, he can be a tough guy as well. There were multiple times, especially in the first half, where the Bucks were trying to still get into that Giannis high post set, but whether it's like a lack of comfort, whether it be Eric isn't confident trying to get the ball up and over or around his defender to get into Giannis, or when they actually did get it to him, the Heat were very, very good about, we're not going to wait for Giannis to size up the situation and then make a move. They swarmed him with like 3 dudes every single time he touched the ball. And that was the same whether he be 15 feet from the basket, whether he tried to do his like get up a head of steam from 30 feet out and rush him. So I thought it was just interesting from Miami, the way that they were able to defend and how they threw off what Giannis was doing even the night before, and add that on top of the fatigue, I'm sure, and the poor shooting overall, etc. I think that all kind of came together to explain it, but something to keep an eye on because the Heat, they playoffs, and if they're going to play that good of defense, especially at home, yeah, that's a tough matchup.
Yeah, it's a good point. They are one of those teams that has the type of personnel that like similarly to Toronto last year, that can be a decent facsimile of what that defense was with the stout, athletic big man in Adebayo and some rugged big wings that are able to help in and try and disrupt Giannis as he's getting into his positions and crowd the ball. I mean, it's pretty amazing to see how Giannis is still able to work, even though anytime they show a replay on defense against most teams, it's like Giannis in the middle of the paint. All 4 players are all turning their eyes, and like he gets boxed in by all of them. Very similar to what that happened in Miami as well. Kyle, I think the other thing with that one, obviously beyond Giannis is struggling, is Chris struggled in this one. Also struggled in the Lakers game, 4 of 16 in the Heat game. Any credence to the fact that maybe it's just a tough shooting night from him, or is it possible that the Heat have the type of wing defenders who could give him trouble? Any thoughts on that?
Well, first you're forgetting the main part, which is Sunday night Miami nightlife. Let's remember.
Thank you. Yes,
I said this last week. Sunday night Miami nightlife, undefeated, but I think it's a combination of both with the wing defenders that Miami has. And we were saying this for years, that Miami has the wing defenders like James Johnson, Bam Adebayo, that they can play this style of basketball, and it's very effective. And with their defense, and sometimes they run a zone, it's pretty effective. And I think Chris is going through a shooting slump, but at the same time, he was pretty much shooting unconscious for a long stretch. So maybe he's just possibly reverting to the mean, or it is a slump. So I think it's a combination of both. And I think Miami just plays with so much physicality that I don't think Milwaukee was expecting in a regular season game. Now, come playoff time, I think the expectations will change, and I think that's something that they'll be more cognizant of. But with how Miami was, I mean, you saw Giannis would get to the paint, and there was just 1 or 2 defenders that was on him, whether it was a foul or not. They were just physically on him, making things tough for him. And then you combine that with the fact that no one can hit a shot, so then you're able to just leave those shooters alone. Chris isn't able to get anything. Eric Bledsoe was non-existent. George Hill and Dante getting hit in the balls. So it was just a very physical game, and I don't think Milwaukee ever adjusted to it. But it's also kind of statement that Milwaukee, with as poor of a shooting night as they had, as good of a shooting night that Miami had, and the physicality of the game, they're still, I mean, it was still kind of within reach of the game. It's never like they were just getting blown up by 20. There are moments where it got up to, 13, 15. It seemed kind of like grim, but they were at least able to somewhat claw their way back. So I think it's just a combination of both, and it'll be interesting to see if, standings hold come the second round of the playoffs. Will Milwaukee be able to adjust with it? Is this, again, an outlier shooting night? Because now we're looking at, 6 quarters against the Miami Heat in which the Bucks have been unable to offensively get anything going against this team.
Yeah, that's a good point. Calling back to the earlier part of the season. Only other thing I wanted to point out from this one that I thought was kind of interesting was the battle of the centers. So Brook Lopez, 21 points. Not a lot of damage for him. Came from 3 in this one. He hit 2 of 4. Quality stuff from him, but it felt like the Bucks were certainly willing to go to him inside, and this has obviously been a recurring theme that we've talked about this year. But Miami likes to go small. They're not going to have huge guys out on the floor. They can go with Bam at center, obviously, and he's not gigantic, but he is athletic and able to guard guys like that. But a lot of times they'll downsize, and the Bucks were more than willing to let Lopez do a little bit of work inside. I thought it was an interesting contrast, Riley, with the Heat countering with Kelly Olynyk, who doesn't really give them a whole lot of defense, obviously, inside, but he is that prototype, stretch 5 who can hurt the Bucks defense. We kind of got a taste of it felt like I was getting flashbacks to the Celtics games where Al Horford would beat us, because this feels like one of the few times this year where we really had a stretch 5 damage us like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've just been lucky and not playing a lot of stretch 5s or just the shots weren't going, but you're 100% right that, and I think this was almost the same situation. I have to pull up the box score from the first game, but I remember it was either Kelly Olynyk or I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head. He was in Portland, now he's in Miami. Meyers Leonard. I think he might have been involved in the first game, but they both kind of have a similar-ish like stretch 5 situation, and there are a lot of times where, because Brook Lopez just commits and the defense commits so much to the scheme that they're going for, you're obviously going to leave those shots open. In this case, Olynyk goes 3 for 3, and they were within pretty quick succession in the second and third quarter, I believe. And so when that happens, I mean, there's not much you can do besides shake your head at it, because that's the shot that you want to give up. But you're correct that we've been able to avoid running into that all that much this season. And to Brook's credit as well, he's been doing his best both inside and outside as well. I think in that game, I think he went 2 for 4 from 3. It seems like he's kind of gotten a little bit more into form from distance, so that's helpful. But just there's nobody really to blame except for the scheme, and the scheme works so well that you allow it. And at this point, your 2 options are either hope you don't run into a team with a stretch 5 who's actually a legit stretch 5, or 2, just own it and figure it out the rest of the way for everybody else on defense, and then hope the offense picks up. Because that was similar in the Toronto series. It was like 1 or 2 games where Marc Gasol really kind of gets going from 3. Maybe that's not the thing that spells the entire doom. It was probably more so the fact that you weren't able to keep up on the other side offensively. And so maybe that's a little bit concerned from this game, because the Bucks had difficulty keeping up offensively when, yes, Kelly Olynyk goes 3 for 3, but that's probably not the mainline reason why you say this is the reason we lost, because there's a reason why he's out there wide open every single possession.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, interesting game. Obviously, the Heat are going to, and rightly so, can hang their hat a little bit on their ability to beat the Bucks so far in the regular season this year. But I'm slightly less concerned, just given the fact that there were some insane outlier shooting performances in this one. Moving on, next game the Bucks had was a 119-100 win over the Indiana Pacers. Game lost a good amount of its luster, I would say. Victor Oladipo sat out, and then Malcolm Brogdon, unfortunately, only played around 10 minutes in this one. It's been a tough year for Malcolm Brogdon. I know some people like to bag on him or whatever, but it is kind of a bummer that he feels like he had a good start to the season and then he's just been hurt in and out. Obviously it was a concern whenever he was with the Bucks. So, not too surprising to see it happen with the Pacers, but he goes out early. And then it was really just the only person that was disrupting the Bucks that night was TJ McConnell, who continues to be an annoying pest. But Giannis scores 29 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists. Chris, 9 to 16 from the floor, 20 points. Eric Bledsoe, pretty quiet, but then has a nice rush in the second half to get to 16 points, 5 of 9 from the floor. And our Lord and Savior, Dante Big Ragu DiVincenzo, 19 points, 7 rebounds on 10 shots, tying a career high for him. There wasn't a whole lot for me taking away from this game. There was a little bit of issue guarding Domantas Sabonis in the middle. He's obviously had a lot of success this year as the Pacers in their pick and roll game. You could kind of tell that he didn't have quite the same amount of chemistry with some of their backup guards as he does with Malcolm Brogdon. Miles Turner wasn't able to hurt this team, similar to how he's been a little bit of a disappointment this year. Wasn't able to hurt this Bucks team as a stretch five. McConnell was giving some gritty defensive effort or whatever, getting disruptive and getting a couple steals. But beyond this one, it was really just like the Bucks out-talented them by the end. The Pacers held tough for most of it, but Giannis and company, goes on a big scoring spree in the fourth and really pulls away to make this one be a runaway victory for the Bucks. So not a whole lot to take away from that one. So I'm going to move on straight away to the Los Angeles Lakers game, which was obviously the big matchup from last week. Rightfully so, highly hyped by a lot of the national media types talking about it. Of course, the MVP narrative played well into that, the LeBron James versus Giannis Antetokounmpo matchup, which was, insufferable, I think, as we all expected it would be. So just to give some broad strokes for this game, Bucks shoot 12 of 43 from deep. It's 27.9%. Lakers shoot 6 of 32 from deep. That's just 18.8%. Real tough night for them. If you're looking at the free throw line, Bucks are 17 of 23. Lakers 31 of 38 from the free throw line. And then in terms of just raw box score stuff, Giannis has 32 points. Chris, 12 points, just 5 of 19 from the floor. Bledsoe, just 11 points, 5 of 13. Dante DiVincenzo, 17 points, 7 of 13 from the floor. And then for the Lakers, LeBron has 37 points on 21 shots, 8 rebounds, 8 assists. Anthony Davis has 30 points, 25 of those came in the second half, 10 of 24 from the floor. So let's just do real quickly. We'll do a high overview and then talk about some more specifics as we go through. Any big takeaways from the initial viewing of this game that you had, Kyle?
Yes and no. I think it was, people want to berate the refs and talk about the, disparity in the free throws. But I guess with this game, what really I thought was interesting was that Giannis was still able to be relatively efficient, and it didn't seem like he was efficient himself. But yeah, he still had 32 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, 10 to 21. And I think a lot of it is because he shot so well from the free throw line, and that's something that has really stood out throughout the All-Star break as his free throw abilities have improved. Obviously, Chris not contributing, Eric Bledsoe not contributing does not help Milwaukee. And same with the 3-point shooting. But I think it was just more it never felt like, it felt like Milwaukee was always playing with house money with how well it played. And that, the bottom of the well was going to, like the other shoe was going to drop. And that happened at the end of the third quarter, primarily when they couldn't take advantage of LeBron being on the bench while Giannis was in. And that seems to be when everything fell apart for the Bucks, which is strange because you would have thought that this would have been the perfect time to take advantage of it, because all season long, when LeBron sits, the Lakers are significantly poor just based off of that rating. So I think for me, it was just more of it never felt like Milwaukee was playing well enough that I felt confident that they were winning. And then it kind of became more of a reality once that end of the third quarter and especially late in the fourth quarter happened. But yeah, good job on Giannis for still getting a good stat line. And, it's good to see that he was aggressive and getting, some of the foul calls. At least he was getting calls go his way.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on the refs real quickly. I don't know. I guess I always have trouble blaming a lot of stuff on the refs. I think it's tough to make. I don't know. I think it's an impossible job to please everyone. I actually thought the refs were giving the Bucks a good amount of fouls in the first half, like in terms of getting the Lakers in foul trouble and that kind of stuff. Obviously, the Lakers end up taking a large amount of free throws, and their free throw rate is well above their season average. But I think part of that is due to the fact that they just took a ton of shots at the rim as opposed to how many the Bucks were taking. But I don't know. I didn't have a huge issue with the refs. I don't know about you, Riley.
No, not really. And if you just even look at the personnel foul difference, like it's a 5 foul difference, not the end of the world. So I think that kind of again bleeds into what you were saying, where the Bucks were still getting a somewhat not favorable call, but pretty even call in the first half at least. And beyond the refs, if I was to do like a high level summary, rewatching it, right before we started recording here, what jumped out was neither team did much for almost 75-80% of the game to really differentiate from one another. So I think that speaks to how well they match up with each other. I think it was both an offensive grind for both teams, and really the main difference, like Kyle was saying, was that third quarter where, all credit to LeBron and Anthony Davis. They really stepped up in that, coming out of the half and going through those 12 minutes. And unfortunately for us, neither Chris nor Eric did as much. I think Eric, for both the guys, is difficult because they got their shots up. It wasn't like Eric totally disappeared. He was still trying to do his thing, trying to go inside, and a lot of his shots were really difficult with dudes all around him in the paint. And so credit to him for still trying. And Chris, I think for this past week, it's difficult because he came off that sore neck. Is that 2 for 10? Like Kyle was saying, is this a regression to the mean? Like, what are we doing there? And so the main difference, not so much that they out-talented us or anything along those lines. It was just their two top guys came together really in a forceful way in the third quarter. And it was enough over that 12 minutes to push it out where the Bucks didn't have an answer. And you kind of go back to this grinding game in the fourth quarter. And that's kind of all she wrote. So if I was to do a high level, I'm not super concerned about it. It was just kind of a frustrating watching that third quarter unfold. And it's like, we just cannot keep up offensively the way that those other guys are.
Yeah, it's sort of sick, but like at this point, I wasn't able to watch the game at the time that it aired, and I saw it was like a 113 to 103 loss, and then I saw that the Lakers didn't shoot very well from three, and I was like, oh, okay. So I feel like we'll actually have something to talk about as opposed to just like calling it an outlier and hoping that the math will work our way. And I do feel like there is some small stuff from this one. I mean, obviously, you would hope that the Bucks would shoot better from three in another matchup. But I was looking a little bit at some of the stats on cleaning the glass. So the Bucks took 5% less shots at the rim than they usually would. Basically, they allocated those to 3-point shots, which clearly didn't go in. But one of the issues was that the Bucks were really, really good at the rim. Like they were 19 of 24 on shots at the rim. So I think there's an argument to be made that I think they were missing George Hill a little bit and his ability to try to get to the rim and take some of those shots as opposed to just settling for triples. I think you probably would have liked Eric Bledsoe to maybe even be a little bit more forceful trying to get to the rim. But I was impressed the Bucks were able to shoot that high of a percentage against the Lakers, who aren't like world beaters at the rim, but they do have a lot of length. And I think maybe that could have deterred the Bucks a little bit from shooting there. And then, conversely, this game inside, they finished 46 to 50 in Lakers advantage in terms of points in the paint. But if you look, the Lakers usually take around like 40% of their shots at the rim. And as we all know, the Bucks, are one of the best teams in the league in terms of deterring teams from both taking shots at the rim and shooting at the rim. So like I said before, Lakers normally take about 40% of their shots at the rim, and 46% of their shots were at the rim in this one. So an incredibly high percentage. I think that lends itself to some of the fouls that they got. And the Bucks didn't hold them to their usual, 54% as a defense. They did hold the Lakers like 10%. They shot 10% less at the worse at the rim than they usually do. But the Bucks still didn't, they didn't deter them from taking those shots, and those shots still went in at basically a 60% clip at the rim. So I think there's some small stuff if you're looking at the inside game that the Bucks weren't really able to work away at the margins to try and win that out. So I'll be curious watching in future matchups if the Bucks are able to maybe try and get to the rim more. And I think this has been an interesting sort of thing for us to track this year. Kyle, is like with the loss of Malcolm Brogdon, this team I think is a little bit more reliant on the three, but trying to find ways where this team, when the threes aren't falling, making sure that they are still able to manufacture buckets, whether it's at the free throw line or getting to the rim.
Yeah, and a lot of that is going to fall on Eric Bledsoe. I know we're going to talk about that later on in this episode, but it really does fall on Bledsoe to be that guy to drive to the hoop and get those free throw opportunities and kind of be more aggressive. And he just hasn't been that this past week. And I don't know if it's because he's still not at 100%, because I know Bud had mentioned that last week against the Hornets game. And I think he's the guy that, with no Brogdon, he's going to need to be the one that takes it to the hoop, unless you're going to go with Brook Lopez posting up for the block, which could be an effective model as well. But then it kind of seems to throw off the offensive system. So I don't know to what extent it's going to have, but yeah, I think with no Brogdon, it does rely especially on Bledsoe to pick it up. And if he doesn't, that's when I think the Bucks are going to be in the most trouble.
Well, and if I can just jump in real quick, outside of just the Bucks, I think two things that also I want to toss in for like small details. I think the ability of LeBron James and Anthony Davis to work in a pick and roll with one another, I think that was something that people highlighted even before the season. And in this game, there were multiple times where we've seen the Bucks, their drop zone defense works really, really well when the opponent's personnel isn't used to it, or they don't have a dominant pick and roll ball handler. And maybe LeBron doesn't have the most crisp handle ever, but through his sheer number of skill sets, given who he is, all those sorts of things, and he still is a good facilitator, there were a lot of possessions where instead of the drop zone throwing him off, he's able to kind of, and we've seen this with other teams, like even like Devin Booker and the Suns, I think in the last matchup, if you have a guy who has the timing, has the instincts while they're approaching the guy, the center who's in that drop area, to manipulate and let their teammate kind of work around them. And there was a lot of like lobs, alley-oops, finding good passing lanes, like getting around the main defender, whatever it was. I thought that was interesting just because those are two guys that make that Milwaukee's defensive scheme, even though it's still stout, maybe not nearly as stout in that one-on-one matchup. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, and it's not the end of the world because there's only like 8 minutes for him or 12 minutes, Kyle Korver, he looked awful defensively. Like Alex Caruso was putting them on freaking skates. It was ugly. Now, he was out for a while with injury, so maybe it's just he's got to work his way back, but that was not encouraging. And then Robin Lopez, when he goes in only 8 minutes, he has he has one shot attempt which missed, and then he turned the ball over 3 times and got 3 fouls as well. So not covering himself in glory there either. So I think with all that, as we were saying, the starters, but even the bench guys weren't all that great besides Dante. Pat was okay, sort of, but he didn't really flash all that much to me. Marvin, he only gets 5 points, but that's pretty much what you expect. He's not supposed to play a big role off the bench. And so you combine all those things, and that's just kind of, that's where all the issues come from. The question is, how do you solve for that? I think defensively, you just kind of live with it and hope everybody else shoots as poorly as they did. Offensively, that's kind of more of a question to me.
It's a great point about the pick and roll game. I think it's fascinating. I think we see this a little bit with Ben Simmons too. We saw it at the start of the last Philly game before he went out with the back injuries. He was able to get to the rim, but the confidence that LeBron James has when he comes around that pick and roll, he's not like a tiny guard. Like he's not going to pull up for 3. He's not going to just like settle for a mid-range jumper. He is more than comfortable working within the paint, knowing defenders are watching him. And he's not going to be afraid to try and finish around Brook Lopez or Robin Lopez. Like he thinks he's going to probably get a foul or he's going to finish because he's one of the best finishers at the rim of all time. So I think that's a really, really good point. And knowing that the guy at the other end of that pick and roll who's popping or rolling is another similarly amazing finisher at the rim or a really decent shooter from outside or the mid-range, and Anthony Davis. There's a reason it's so potent. So I'm really interested to watch that. Another small thing that I saw was when you're talking about the marginal things, I certainly noticed Kyle Korver getting absolutely put on skates. And if you're talking about a guy in the playoffs, Rajon Rondo just like made him look like he made him look like he was 38. He made him look his age. And if you're talking about a guy in the playoffs who teams are going to target, we can talk about this later, but like that's case in point. That's what's going to happen. Another one's a couple, small thing, but the Lakers were switching on pick and rolls, obviously, and the Bucks were trying to take advantage of that and get Giannis on Danny Green. I think it might have been in like the third quarter. But basically, the Bucks are running these pick and rolls to get Giannis matched up with Danny Green. And basically I on pretty close to consecutive possessions, Giannis gets him can't get a baseline spin around him, can't finish at the rim, and then on another one, he's not able to really take advantage of that switch. I mean, those are the kind of hunting out mismatch things that occasionally the Bucks are going to have to go to in the playoffs. And you just hope to see, Kyle, that Giannis is able to take advantage of that. And obviously in this game he wasn't, and that wound up being, those small things wind up being the difference.
Yeah, and I think it's also tougher just because this Lakers team, and I think it's the same with Miami, there's not a lot that you can exploit that really benefits Giannis. Like Miami, it's kind of tough where you can focus on Giannis, hope that he can exploit it. But if he can't, you would expect someone like Bledsoe to, but I don't know whether it's just the confidence or the opponent, because, it's not like Miami has point guards that you really fear. It's not like LA has a point guard that you really fear. You can kind of see it with Wes Matthews. You can kind of see it with Chris Middleton, where you can scheme something that it gives them the benefit of the doubt. But, and again, how much of this are we going to wonder and discuss if the Bucks win both of these games, if they shoot a little bit better from three? And I think that's really where I'm trying to decide on if this is just a normal thing, or is this just a thing that if the Bucks shoot a little bit better, this is a non-discussion. So I think right now there's only a few teams that you can't really scheme for Giannis to exploit, and I think it's just because Giannis is also that caliber of player where he can exploit it regardless. But with some of the other ones, it's more of a confidence issue / are their shots falling or not?
Yeah. Well, and then obviously the other thing briefly from this one was Giannis obviously had a precautionary MRI. By the time this podcast come out, when we're recording, we still don't know the severity of it. By the time this comes out, you might know it. But I'm just going to go say glass half full, because glass half empty isn't fun. And just like say maybe he's, he'll be out for a little while, but say like he's not going to be out for the whole season or something. So, obviously if that does wind up being the case where he's out for, a shorter period of time, could be a good example, Riley, of where we'll get to see these other guys step up and how they're able to hold the line in terms of the Bucks trying to maintain the best record in the NBA.
Here's the thing. Ersan's been waiting for this moment. Now, I'm not going to say Ersan was hoping Giannis would get injured, but we all know if Giannis sits, Ersan's the first guy getting the calls for the starting role. So it'll be the ultimate test of just how far Budenholzer has moved his BFF status from Ersan to Marvin to see who steps up. But I think, assuming that your prognosis, since you are the podcast official, medical professional, assuming that you're assuming that it's an accurate prognosis, I think it's difficult with this team because, we've seen it because they're so slavish. Sounds a little extreme, but there's this need all the time, even when Giannis is out there, to kind of function within the broad outlines of what they're trying to do. And when you don't have a guy like Giannis out there to essentially draw the entire defense in, that makes life a lot more difficult. Now, Chris Middleton, to his credit, in a couple of games where Giannis wasn't out there, he was shooting super crazy. He was aggressively taking shots. And so I doubt that the Bucks will be able to continue to beat opponents, especially since the schedule has gotten a lot more difficult with the closing couple of weeks of the schedule here. But I think it's only for the best in that it'll force upon Chris and Eric to, you guys have to show up, and we'll see, maybe identify a couple areas of weakness where Giannis isn't out there. Here are things that we're struggling with. How do we kind of adjust for that? So you can kind of look at it where they're most likely not going to lose the 1 seed. I think that would be tough for them to do at this point. Maybe, depending on how long he's out, maybe the Lakers could catch him for the best record, which would kind of stink. But I think mostly positive if it gives him a little bit of rest and it gives the rest of the team time to say, here's what we can do when he's not out there. Here are things, you step up, those sorts of things that hopefully down the line, if Budenholzer takes it on as a lesson, can be helpful in tighter situations or in those couple minutes where Giannis isn't playing in the playoffs.
Yeah. Yep. I would agree. Any thoughts lingering or last thoughts, Kyle, before we move on to our next segment?
Not really. I think Riley covered it pretty well, and especially with Ersan, it seems like this is going to be the player that benefits the most because he's going to be kind of brought out of the cold straight into the starting lineup, I'm assuming. Marvin Williams will still get, a good 20-ish minutes. Maybe we have more Chris Middleton playing the 4, which I know we haven't really seen since Budenholzer has been a coach, but that might be a potential as well. But I think it's also a good time for Giannis to kind of get that breather, just because, if the Bucks already got a playoff spot, they're likely going to cruise to that number 1 seed. So yeah, it's just a matter of, do you want to try and get the best record overall? But how much of that is really going to matter? Because this Bucks team has shown that they can play on the road as well as at home. So I think if there is a time to be more on the cautious side, and I know, the prognosis look better than initially feared, but maybe it's just let Giannis ride it out. And with this month getting tougher, unless you really want to, I guess, try and make a point, I think it's going to be more of a, how much is Marvin Williams going to play? Is Ursa going to be brought back from the cold? Are we going to see more Kyle Korver? Are we going to see potentially Sterling Brown again? Like, how many players is Budenholzer going to reach into to cover this void? Because we all know it's not going to be DJ Wilson, so we're just going to bypass him. Like, a guy like Sterling Brown, like, is he going to get more playing time because of it? Or if a guy like Ersan goes from completely not playing to starting lineup?
The one other thing I would just jump in real quick, like, let's assume that is that positive. It's not the end of the world. It's a relatively minor, like, he tweaked it, he strained it. Two things that I'm curious about is, one, how precautionary are they? Are they just going to, like, try? I doubt they'd shut him down for the rest of the season, but is it going to be, it could be a 1 to 2 week if it was somewhat of a tighter, if they needed him out there. Are they going to extend that out to like 3 or 4 weeks? And if that's the case, what does that mean for like his gas tank? Is he able to stay in shape? Like, obviously he'll stay in shape, but what does that mean for when he comes back, working himself back up to the right minute load? Because we've talked about this, and I think others have as well. Seeing him at the end of games where he's playing a lot of minutes, just because of how frenetic he is and how much energy he's putting out there. Even a 36-minute outing he's looking pretty gassed by the fourth quarter, which might be not a big deal, and a lot of other teams are doing load management. But if he has these 2, 3, 4 weeks off, and then not a lot of time in actual game action because the season's pretty much wrapped up at that point, does that come into play if and when the Bucks have to go to him again in even more minutes in a more crucial series? So those are kind of things that I would keep in the back of my mind, assuming that it's a relatively minor thing.
Yeah, obviously there's never a good time for there to be an injury scare with Giannis. So we will have to wait and see the severity and then how the Bucks decide to handle it. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break for an ad here, and then on the other side, we're going to do a trust level index. How are we feeling about the Bucks players in the potential playoff rotation? So stay tuned. All right, we are back. Okay, fellas. So I was interested in this. I was listening to the Zach Lowe and Kevin Arnovitz conversation, lengthy and very important to read or listen to, I should say. Talking about the Bucks, their the lingering doubts about them, why they're not really the overwhelming favorites. And I thought it would be interesting at this point. So we're about 3/4 of the way through the season to just look through most of the guys on the roster, sans Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and scale of 1 to 10. It doesn't have to be super strict, but just a way to try and converse and talk about how much do you trust these players for the Bucks in their playoff rotation. So I thought it would be important to start it off right away with the elephant in the room and start with Eric Bledsoe. So on these trust level index, the scale, Riley, why don't you go first? So let's start with Eric Bledsoe. How are you feeling about him in the playoff rotation?
If I was to go 1 to 10, I'd give him maybe like a 4. Like, Kyle and I talked about this last week, and all three of us have discussed it throughout the season. He's having a very good regular season, but there's nothing that I've seen that's been like, okay, he's this changed guy. Like, mentality wise, I think he's playing exactly the same way that he usually does. Mentality wise, we've seen even in this past week a couple of games where he kind of takes himself out of the offense or whatever the situation is. And I'm not going to say he's looking like a one-trick pony, because I think his 3-point numbers are okay as well this season, which is helpful. But I'm just really concerned about a tight series. We've seen it 2 years in a row now, and it'll probably show its head again. And is he going to be able to this time work his way through it, or is it going to be a repeat of those past seasons? So I'll give him a 4. It would probably be lower if he hasn't had a couple of the big games that he has, but he's very streaky in that sometimes he'll be really on, sometimes he'll take himself out. And if he takes himself out of one playoff game, does that lead into another and another after that? So I'm going to say a 4 would be where I'm at.
Kyle, what about you? Kyle?
Adam, what about you?
Okay, I will go. So I'm thinking, I have such a hard time. So I was thinking about this, like, he's literally the guy who creates the most conversation. If there's no Eric Bledsoe on the team, let's say like George Hill is just the starter for this team, and then all of a sudden like Pat Connaughton is probably playing more minutes or whatever, and like Dante is the sixth man. Do I feel better or worse about this team? I don't know. I think I would feel worse. I think I'm still at like a 7 for Eric Bledsoe.
Oh, okay, that's pretty high.
Yeah, I think I feel like I'm too much of an Eric Bledsoe stan, but like the reality is like I don't think he's going to be axed from the rotation. Like I just don't think I don't really see a reality in which Bud completely removes him from the Bucks playoff rotation. That seems impossible to me. I don't know. I can't even see that reality. Maybe like if because it can't get worse than what Toronto did to him last year. Like we've seen the nadir of what Eric Bledsoe's playoff performance is going to be like. And maybe he hits that nadir again, but like I don't think it can get worse than a team not guarding him at all. Like treating him like a ghost out there offensively. So, and he was, the Bucks defense was still pretty good with him on the floor. In the playoffs last year, the defense wasn't really the issue. I still think he's pretty critical to this, the Bucks defensive scheme and ensuring that guards don't feel comfortable on that end. One of the things that I thought was interesting was Zach Lowe was talking about his Bam Adebayo piece, and he gave an anecdote about how, Bam's like offensive shots weren't going in, but Myers Leonard was like telling him, hey man, we just need you to do all of the kind of little stuff defensively, even if your shots aren't falling. Like you need to get those key blocks, you need to get those huge rebounds. Like we need all of that stuff from you. And that's always a huge question with Eric Bledsoe because he seems to have such a difficult time with the mental aspect of the game. But I think if he's able to have that mentality where he's still like, he says, I'm going to, hold this guy to 25% shooting or whatever, and does all of those sort of defensive things to stop the opposing point guard or whoever it is as a lead ball handler. I just still think that the Bucks are going to need that. We haven't had to see George Hill take on a huge increased role. A couple years ago in the finals, maybe he was injured, but like not like he was any great shakes. And obviously he looked good for the Bucks last year, but like I still think there's a pretty key role that we need out of Eric Bledsoe this year. And even if his game has waxed and waned and looked weird at different times, like I just think they're still going to need him. And I think that's why I'm giving him a 7. Like I still think that he's going to have to be part of it. And I still trust that he at least can give it on one end. Yeah,
I think what you said about our team's going to ghost him, that's the big question, right? And I think the issue, and you brought this up, I mean, even a couple of months ago, where it's a little annoying talking about the regular season because it's like, are we just going to get to another point where the opponent's going to say, okay, we're just going to let Eric and Brooke try to beat us from outside? Like that's just going to be the offense we're going to allow them. And if that's the case, the issue last year was like, it was doubly problematic because they were just leaving, like you said, Eric, they just didn't even defend him. So he would like, get the ball out from 3, and then he took himself out of the game so that he didn't even like try to attempt the 3 or even try to drive inside. He just like got rid of the ball. And so if that's going to be the case again, which I think is relatively reasonable, that could happen once more, that's going to be problematic, obviously. So I think you're right that he's going to be important. I think it's impossible that he's going to get taken out of the rotation just because even when he was at his lowest, they still ran him out there because who knows, maybe he'll snap out of it. And if that's the case, that makes life a lot easier for everybody else. And then you actually have your third guy. But I would say just because we've seen it 2 years in a row. And I hate having to say that like he's a playoff choker. I don't think that's the case. Like you said, it seems like it's just a mental thing. And for whatever reason, just in that situation versus the regular season, like a big game, it just works opposite for him. And so that's what's kind of holding me back, is that we might see another team go really like comically all out and say, we're just going to let those two guys beat us, and we're going to try and stop Giannis as much as we can. And Chris, whether or not he's hitting shots, that's as of late not nearly much the case. Maybe he'll make enough shots that it won't even matter if Eric isn't playing up to his potential.
Yeah, all fair points. We're going to move on just because we have a lot of players to get through, and I guarantee you we'll talk about Eric Bledsoe a lot more. Okay, Pat Connaughton, 1 to 10.
Well, we should know real quick, the reason why you guys don't hear Kyle's voice is it seems like his internet just dropped off. So maybe he'll hop back on, but just so you know, that's the reason why he's not talking. So Pat Connaughton, oh man, this is a really tough exercise because I have some open questions about all of the various sub guys, because this is mostly the subs. I would say for him, I'll give him like a 5 out of 10. It feels like he's very in his lane. Like he's not wonderful as a man defender. He's shown that throughout the season. He showed that last year, so that's not crazy. Really what comes down to him is like, does his shot hit or not? And I don't think that's necessarily a question of, is he ready for the moment? Because he's a pretty willing shooter. It's just more so, does he happen to be on or otherwise? So I would give him a 5 just because it almost completely comes down to, does this 3 fall? Because the defense that's been surprisingly, whether you can say positively or negatively, consistent throughout the entire season.
Yeah, I'm going to go with 6, only because we did see him. I thought he's critical in that Boston series. His shot was falling, but I thought he was doing some other little things that are important, whether it's like grabbing offensive rebounds or that kind of stuff. So I'm not as confident about him playing as large of a role in the rotation this year in the playoffs. I don't think he will. But I could see him, performing a similar role as an energy guy for, 8 to 10 minutes or something. And he's one of the guys in terms of the lower rung guards that I would rather see out there. Because I think I would rather see him out there than Kyle Korver personally. So
yeah, I agree completely.
All right, George Hill.
Him, I'll actually give him an 8. Now, it depends on what's up with the fact that he no longer has his testes, so that might be a problem. That might throw him off for a little bit, recovering and figuring out how to play without that. But even like 2 months into the season, I was like, it's got to, at some point, the 3-point shooting is going to tail off. Like, it's just not going, and it has dropped off a tiny bit. He's not hitting 75% of his threes, but I think we saw last season in the playoffs, especially, and this year, even against the Lakers, you miss him out there. Just the ability to orchestrate in a way that I don't think any of the other lead guards can, given his size and his confidence, his ability to kind of function in offense around him. And so I think there's nothing in terms of, rather than injury, that's going to throw me off and say that he's going to not step up to the moment. So I'd give him like an 8.
Okay. And it looks like Kyle's rejoined us. So Kyle, we're talking about confidence level of George Hill in the playoff scale of 1 to 10. How are you feeling about George Hill?
Maybe Kyle isn't actually back.
Or he isn't back. Okay. All right. Well, okay.
Back to you, Adam. How do you feel about George Hill then?
I feel good about George Hill. I would agree. I think an 8 is a good thing to do for him. I mean, he's played so well this year. He was so integral to the team last year. I'm just so, I trust him, at all levels of the game. For some reason, I wonder if he is due for any sort of dry spell. I think he's so critical to his ability, though, with his decent amount of playmaking or ability to pass off the dribble. I think Bud has trusted him a lot with, if he decides in the playoffs to keep running out units that are all super subs. Basically, George Hill is the hub of those lineups, so we need him out there. So I think 8 is a good level to peg him at. So I'll go 8. All right, next one.
I'm gonna leave this one to you because it's only right that you could be the first one to give the confidence scale here, and we know the confidence scale is going to be a 15 to 20 out of 10. So I'll leave the floor for Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, this next one is Dante DiVincenzo. As we all know, He tied his career high last week. He also scored 17 points against the Lakers, and dare I say it, at times looked like the second best Buck out there. I don't know. I don't know if it's true or not, but I sure like saying it. I'm gonna give him an 8, the same as George Hill, because he's never done it before. I mean, who knows? He could turn into a pumpkin. He could get like absolutely decimated at the rim at times. I mean, his shot could not fall. I mean, the one thing I'll say is like, yes, the playoffs are completely different, and this isn't a very good argument, especially not for reasons why we drafted him. But like, this is a dude who, in the national championship game of college basketball, scored like 33 points. So it's not like hasn't played in any huge games. Like, this dude wasn't playing at like IUPUI and like just won the Mountain Valley Conference Championship or whatever. Like, this dude was on the biggest stage, huge set of eyeballs, and scored a ton of points for his team. So I'm not really afraid of him like shirking from the moment or anything. My only concern would be if his 3-point shot starts to go cold. But I mean, he has shown an incredible knack to finish at the rim this year. I've been very impressed by that. He was around 61% or something that I saw. If that holds up in the playoffs, I'd be really impressed by that. Yeah, I'm going to go with an 8. I mean, I think there are concerns just given his 3-point shot waxing and waning, and he hasn't played in the playoffs before. But yeah, I'm going to go an 8.
I would say I'd probably give him a 6, not because I don't think he'd be capable, but I think that first, and maybe he works out of it right away in the first round or second round if the team is playing well enough that it's not that big of a deal. But I think that first experience, we've seen of it, like it's almost impossible to rely upon a rookie in the playoffs. And no, he's not a rookie in a technical sense, but this is more so his actual first season. And so maybe that is difficult for him. But the areas where I would be concerned is because his game is so much like do stuff that's super valuable within the course of playoffs, where it's like the difference in the game is whether or not you're able to have guys do stuff. So that's super valuable. But given how often his game relies on either threes or getting to the rim, and he already doesn't get a ton of foul calls, as it were, like he doesn't go to the free throw line that much for a guy who shoots inside as much as he does. And so those would be things where maybe the defense is tuned up. He's not getting as many easy looks or as good of looks at the rim, and that kind of throws him off a little bit. And so I would give him a 6 just because I think change in speed, change in the way defenses play, first experience, those sorts of things. But I don't think at this point it's not a question of is he capable of doing it. I think he's proven throughout the season that he is more than capable. So it'll just be a matter of execution at that point.
Boo! It should be higher.
Yeah, I know. I thought you were going to give him a 9 over George Hill. That would have been so on brand. He'd have gone slightly above George Hill is reliable.
Okay, so
I hear Kyle.
I know.
Yeah.
Finally, I just have to use my phone instead of my laptop, so we'll see how this goes. But all right, so Dante, trust. I mean, I trust Dante a lot. Probably more than most humans, not name my wife and my son. But I'd probably give him a 7. I'd probably give him a 7 just because what we're going to ask Dante to do is kind of what he's been doing all year, off the ball, try and get some deflections and disrupt the passing lanes. When he's on the ball, probably shooting. I don't expect him to do a lot of playmaking and have that responsibility on him. I feel like in the playoffs, it's going to primarily come down to Giannis, Eric, George, and maybe Chris. So I guess what we're asking Dante to do and what he has shown so far would give me the idea that even if it's like 10 minutes, I know for those 10 minutes, he's going to run around. He's going to sky it for rebounds. He's going to take a couple threes. Hopefully he makes it. And I think that's just and that's maybe because of, like I said, the expectations that I'm having for him going into the playoffs. That's just why I think I would put him at a 7 or 8 is more what the expectation is. It's not like we're asking him to be, the super sub off the bench. I think that's more of what we're expecting out of George Hill. And if we had George Hill's expectations for Dante, then I'd have it lower. But because I think he's more reliable than Connaughton will be in terms of his shooting and defensively. And then with Sterling, it just seems like, at least with the ball, Sterling does not seem to have it for some odd reason. And it seems like Dante has been able to put it together well enough that if he does get 10 or 15 minutes, then the Bucks will be fine. Now, if he's starting to get to the 20, 30-minute range, that's not an overtime game, then I'm a little bit concerned.
All right. Moving on. Riley, how are you feeling about Kyle Korver?
He gets a 1 to a 2. I don't trust Kyle Korver with my life. Like, I think there's a lot of people who would say that you have him there to like hit 3 threes in a critical game. I mean, lose my number, bro. He's going to get killed out there defensively. There's a reason why he was playing so many minutes for the Jazz last year, and then he fell off the face of the planet for the Jazz. Like, he's just, he does not have it defensively. And there was a time, oddly enough, where people believed that he did have it enough to not matter. Like he like didn't die every possession for like a 2-week stretch. It's like, oh man, Kyle Korver's kind of playing some sneaky good defense. Like, no, we cannot say that because he's going to get picked apart by any team with any sort of scheme or any sort of coaching. And so I'm giving him a 2 simply because he might make a 3, but I cannot imagine that those minutes would be anything other than a net negative on the defensive end. So I'm going real low with him, even though he's been better than I would have expected. But I came in from like the bar was in the core of the earth. And so we just barely cleared that, you know?
Okay. All right, Kyle.
Oh, dang. I thought I was low, and I was going to say 3. Just because Kyle Korver is the kind of guy that he might win you a playoff game just by going 4 or 7 from 3. And it's going to happen within a 10, 15-minute span. So that's where I was feeling with him, and that's why I only gave him a 3, because defensively I think we all know defensively he's going to be a disaster. And it's just a matter of can they cover him enough that it's not a complete train wreck. I know Riley mentioned his time in Utah, and I think that's just a valid concern to have as well. But at this rate, yeah, I give him a 3. I don't think Bud's going to play him a lot, and if he does, then the Bucks are in a bad spot. So he'll still win you a playoff game because he's still a very good 3-point shooter. It's just that we hope that it's not a consistent thing that is going to be relied upon, I guess. And I don't know. The less we see Kyle Korver, the better for everyone involved.
Yeah, I'm going with a 2. Riley, I wouldn't echo his sentiments exactly. He said it much more eloquently than I ever could. But yeah, 2. All right, Wesley Matthews, Riley, how you feeling?
I'll have to eat a little crow here. I'll give him maybe like a 5 or something. I think it all comes down to more so defensively how well he holds up. Now, this past game against the Lakers, like LeBron, he did LeBron things. So how much of that is West's fault? I don't really think so. I think he's provided really good defense, and he continues to get the call as the guy that's going to take care of the opponent's dominant wing or forward. And so I think he's done well enough at that. I think at this point we can rely upon him to do that consistently. So I probably maybe like a 5 or 6, and the variance is, does he choose to do just 3s, like catch and shoot 3s as we would ideally like him to do? Or does he kind of freestyle every once in a while, as he is also want to do and like jab step a bunch and try and beat a guy off the dribble, or like go into the paint and post a guy up, or like crazy Wes Matthews things? So I think it comes down to, does he stay within his lane? If he does so, I think he'll provide enough on the defensive end to be reliable. So probably like a 6, and just it depends on the shot selection.
Wow, that's good. Kyle, what about you?
I'd probably go with 7, just because, as Riley mentioned, on the defensive side is where I really feel like Wes is going to shine in these playoffs, just because he can still take one of the tougher wing assignments and take that burden off of Middleton. He's shown it with James Harden. He's shown it with LeBron that he can, to an extent, limit and I don't want to say limit the other player, but he's at least shown that he's a better defensive option than I think Brogdon would have been. Now, yes, there is the concern of, well, if he has another shooting slump and doesn't hit his shots, how effective is he really going to be? Because that's kind of one of the main reasons why he was brought in here. But I would say if Wes Matthews can still get around 35% and above, that's going to help out Milwaukee more than most of the other guys on the bench. And I think he's going to be the one starter where he's probably going to go anonymous a few times and only have a couple points. But if his defense holds up to the standard that he's been showing, then I think Milwaukee will still be in a good spot. So I would say 7, just because his defense is going to be way more valuable and something that I have seen with other team superstars to give me confidence that he can at least do the job at that end of the floor.
Well, and if I can just jump in real quick, not related to this list, but the one thing about Wes Matthews being out there defensively is I think it wasn't an excuse necessarily, because I think it was partially the truth during the Raptors series, but between Wes and Giannis out there, who are probably going to get, they're going to tag team whoever the best forward or wing is for the other opponent, depending on Bud. It comes down on Chris Middleton. He's not going to have nearly as much of the excuse or the thing to fall back on about the defense. And so Wes performing well, I think it puts even more of a spotlight on Chris. Like, you have to show it on the offensive end. You're not going to have to focus nearly as much on defense, so you have to show it on offense. And so he's not on the list, but that's just something I want to keep in mind as well, is the stakes for Chris are that much higher if Wes plays up to his potential.
Yeah, I'm going like a 4 for Wes Matthews. I don't feel like
Wow.
I think he certainly filled his role. I think there's certainly arguments to be made that we needed someone who didn't need to have the ball very often, like Wes Matthews, able to shoot. All he really needs to do is catch and shoot. He plays really rugged defense. All great stuff. There's just this like small lingering feeling in the back of my head that, like, how did Toronto win last year? Like, a lot of their guards, basically everyone's like, the panacea of how you can win in the NBA is you can have all of these guards who can create their own shots, create stuff off the dribble. Like, there's no one who's out there who it's like, oh, this guy isn't a threat, he can just shoot. That's basically what Wes Matthews is. He's not going to be able to really create stuff off the dribble. He basically just needs to shoot. You could say, well, okay, we have Giannis. Why would we need another guy to create off the dribble? Well, we've seen Giannis get stalled out. We've seen Chris, who works from the high post. He's not necessarily creating a ton of stuff. If Eric Bledsoe turns into a pumpkin, like, Wes Matthews, he isn't going to be like catching and shooting off stuff from Eric Bledsoe when no one is guarding him. So also, just given his horrific shooting slump last year for Indiana, granted incredibly different roles, they asked a lot more of him offensively, but I don't know. There were just I have a few small lingering issues with Wes Matthews. I think he's a very good player. I don't think he's going to get like taken out of the starting lineup or anything, but I'm not saying like I couldn't see a crazy world where like Wes Matthews is removed from the starting lineup and like George Hill goes in and starts with him. If like Bud is feeling like Wes Matthews isn't going to make anything the whole time, and then Giannis takes on the best player defensively, Chris takes on the other wing defensively. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. I just as a little bit of a contrarian take, I thought he is the one guy who I feel like gets a complete pass most of the year, and he's done his role. He's done it well. So I don't know. He's just someone who I might have a few questions about come playoff time.
Yeah, I think that's all accurate.
Okay, Marvin Williams. How you feeling, Riley?
I'd give him a 7. It seems like he's stepped in and done the Ersan role pretty much to a T. Now, he's had like 1 or 2 games where he's really excelled defensively or like really made his impact felt on both ends of the floor. I doubt that's going to happen in the playoffs, but I think simply as an upgrade, playing a relatively limited role and just do better than Ersan would do against this guy for 5 minutes or however long he's out there. I think he's more than capable. It's been a while since he was in the playoffs, so maybe that's a little bit of concern. But again, I think for most of these guys, you can look at the first round as just kind of a warm-up round for him, kind of getting back up to speed. So I would say a 7 just because it's a limited role, kind of like Wes Matthews, but the stakes are a little bit lower because the competition he's going to be playing against, in theory, is not going to be as potent as what Wes would be doing, for example. And so for that reason, I'm relatively confident that he'll do well.
Kyle?
I'd say 6. Maybe it's a little bit of Mirotic, PTSD. It's just more. The one thing that Marvin does have going for him is, even if he's unable to hit his shot, at least defensively, he might be someone that you can trust in the playoffs. And that's something I can't say with Ersan. That's something we couldn't say about Mirotic last year. It's something that we never really got to see with DJ Wilson. So I guess I would still feel relatively okay with Marvin Williams just because he seems to get it. He seems to be an intelligent enough basketball player that even if he's not able to get a shot and he's still on the court, he has shown that he's going to be able to cut, and he is trying to get other guys open and setting picks and still working within the function of the offense. And the fact that he's able to pick up on the offensive scheme that Budenholzer has so quickly is a positive sign. I just get a little bit worried that if he's unable to hit his shot, how else is he going to provide value for the Bucks while he's on the court? And maybe that's on a defensive end, and maybe it's his ability to cut. But it's just one of those things where he is so new and is just a difference compared to Ersan that I don't know how much of that is going to be sustainable and how much of that is just a flash in the pan because we haven't seen. Because let's be real, I don't think any of us watch a lot of Charlotte Bobcats and Hornets games in the past to know what Marvin Williams is and has been as a player. So,
yeah, I would agree. I'm right around a 6. Similar trepidations to what Kyle said, given we haven't seen him for a while, but he does unlock those Giannis at center lineups if we need to go to those in the playoffs, and I think in a significantly more impactful way than Ersan Ilyasova obviously did. Speaking of Ersan, Riley, trust level on Ersan.
Like a 3. That's
Ooh.
and I don't think it's even. Again, I think it all comes down to having seen what happened to him with Siakam last year. I can't get him. I can't get the vision of him getting just beasted for like 4 straight minutes out of my mind. Now, a lot of that comes down to the personnel. This isn't even really an indictment on Ersan, like what he does on either end. I think all of us and pretty much all Bucks fans have a lot of respect for what he does. And even though he's 65, like how well he's still playing physically out there. And so it's not even so much, I don't think he'll answer to the moment. I think he still has enough savvy on offense if things start slowing down to be effective. It's just, I worry that at this point, he doesn't necessarily have the legs. And maybe this sort of extended rest with Marvin being out there getting a lot of minutes, maybe that'll help out. But I'd give him a 3 just because I think it's not as bad as Korver, but if you get any sort of athletic wing or forward and you isolate him on Ersan, it's going to be pretty ugly pretty quickly. So I'd give him a low score just because I think it's a bad matchup for most of the time out there, depending on the coaching staff of the other team.
Kyle?
This was the toughest one just because I don't know what the hell to expect out of Ersan. Are we going to get the dude that's hitting step back threes? Maybe. Are we getting the dude that's going to get played off the court if he's matched up against Pascal Siakam or Bam Adebayo? Probably. I don't know. Trust is, I guess the hard thing is, I don't know how I want to define trusting Ersan because I know he's going to go out there and, get a lot of tip-ins and offensive rebounds. I know he's going to go out there and shoot some threes and maybe hit a good chunk of those. I know he's going to go out there and take a charge that may or may not swing a big moment in the game. But is he going to do those things well enough that I want him on the floor ahead of a guy like Marvin Williams, or just saying, screw it, Giannis, just play the 5 or play the 4 way more with Brook or Robin Lopez? I don't know. So I guess I would give him a 4 just because I know what he's going to bring. I just don't know if that's really going to be a good or a bad thing. So, yeah, I guess I'd lean towards 4.
Yeah, I'll go 4 as well. Similar defensive issues, obviously, teams exploiting him in the playoffs and whatnot. We know what he's going to bring offensively. He has some of those skills. Obviously, he's a Bucks legend. It's too bad that his legend might be overwritten now by Marvin Williams, but I feel a little bit more confident with Williams in the Bucks lineup. So, all right, last 2 here. The Lopez twins. Let's just do them in tandem. Brook Lopez and Robin Lopez. How you feeling about them, Riley?
Giving them a 4.
Wait, what?
I think so. The reason why I have not low opinions, but Robin, I mean, it's Robin, right? Like, it's cool that he does the hook shot thing, but I'm not going to say I'm going in there like, man, Robin's going to... I know he's like a really above average backup center for a team. Like, he would be a starter for a lot of teams, and he's on the bench for us, which is great. But I'm a little worried that he will actually do anything all that effective on either end in the playoffs. And for Brook, I'm giving a low score, not because he's not going to have the defensive prowess, because I think he is going to do well on that end. I'm really concerned about the 3-point shooting still because he's been relatively awful all season long. And we saw it last year. He just kind of faded a little bit. He wasn't taking the threes or whatever the deal was. And then it comes down to this is like a trust level index for Budenholzer almost. It's like, okay, if he's not going to take the threes, then are we going to shift things and get them inside to do something different? I have really low confidence that that's going to happen unless it's a real break glass in case of emergency situation. And so as good as he's been on the defensive end, I think there are questions still about what's up with that 3-point shot. And maybe I'll look like an idiot. I hope I do. And he, goes crazy in the playoffs and really hits a lot of critical threes. But, when Kyle dropped off, we talked about this a little bit. The issue is other teams might just be like, okay, we'll just let Brook shoot threes. Maybe he'll make them and maybe he won't. And that'll be cool by us. And if that's going to be the case, does that actually turn into a hamstring for the Bucks if he / Budenholzer is not willing to put him inside? So I'm worried just because he's really great defensively. And I think Giannis is out there to help out. So maybe that's not an issue, but the offense is definitely going to be a question for me. If worst case scenario, if Eric's struggling, if Wes isn't even taking shots or if he's missing everything, I think there's a reality in which he can be helpful. But the question is, do we actually get there?
Kyle, how are you feeling about the low pie?
Okay, so Robin, I would give a 5, kind of similar in which with all these other guys, I know what he's going to do. I just don't know if it's going to work. So I'll give Robin a 5 just because he's not really going to bring anything that makes me think, yes, absolutely get this guy on the court. So I don't know. Robin's just so mad. I've probably been harsher on Robin than most people have, and I probably should be. If he's going to continue shooting, 42% from 3 like he has been the last couple of weeks, then okay, fine, get him on the court. But I don't think anyone actually thinks that's going to happen. While with Brook, I'd give him an 8 because yes, he is shooting very, very poorly this year, and that was a concern that we had going into this year. Like, can he keep up this shooting? Like, can he keep up these shooting stats? So far, that's the resounding no. But Brook's defense has been so good and so vital in terms of protecting the paint that when you pair him and Giannis, it's near impossible to get buckets at the rim for opposing teams. And I think that's something that is going to continue, even if Brook can't get a shot to go. We saw I think it was game 1 of Toronto, that if he goes 5 of 8, that's just going to be icing on the cake, in my opinion. If he's able to hit some threes, that's just going to make things even better and easier for the Bucks. I'm not expecting it to happen, but I still trust that Brook's defense and his post-scoring ability is going to be enough that when he's on the court, he's going to be he's probably the second starter that I trust the most, ironically. Other than Giannis, I trust Brook more than any of the other starters just because the variability and the range of how good they can be and how bad they can be. With Brook, it's so minimal. Like, his floor, what we've seen this year, I think is his floor. And if he can add his 3-point shooting, that's just going to raise the floor. I think he has the highest floor out of all the starters not named Giannis, which I think is huge for him and for me to trust him. I would say Eric has the lowest floor out of the Bucks starters. Then I go Wes. Then I go Chris. Then I would go Brook, if that makes sense, I guess. So that's why I think I would give him an 8. It's just because, if we're going to get this version of Brook, that's still good enough to win Milwaukee playoff games.
Yeah, I think that's a good argument. I don't have a whole lot to add on Robin that hasn't already been said. I'm right about it. At a 5 with him, I think he could give you some spot minutes. I think there's clearly matchups where he is useful, and it's useful to have another big body to throw out there and give Brook a little time off. But there's also, I would say, issues with him that will certainly crop their head up if he doesn't have his head in the game, or if teams are able to exploit him defensively at all. I'm a little more leaning towards Kyle with Brook. I'm also going to give him. I think I'd give him an 8 as well. I think his defensive versatility is too important to this team. I think he's an incredibly important part of their ability to stop teams at the rim, maybe the most important. And then I think offensively, I think the reason that I have a lot more confidence in him is that there might be times where his 3-point shot isn't falling, but it just feels like Bud in particular has had and felt more confident going to Brook in different looks. I think he still has a herky-jerky drive game that could potentially exploit some opponents. He's averaging close to one more post-up a game per game this year than he was last year. We saw even in the Lakers game, there was a lineup Bud threw out there that had no Giannis, no Chris, no Bledsoe, obviously no George Hill, who was out, and it was Brook Lopez. It was to close the third, and it was against a smaller Lakers lineup, and they went straight to Brook, straight to a post up, and I think he got to the free throw line on it. So I think they've just been looking for ways to expand his offensive game and give teams different looks, and that's why I just think he's going to be, I trust him a lot more in the playoffs as well, and I think he's going to stick around. So I'm going to go an 8.
I hope you guys are right.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys. That was a good exercise. It'll be great when Kyle Korver hits like 5 threes in Game 7, and then we all have to come back.
Do I still have to give my other one since I cut out with Bledsoe and Connaughton? I don't know how much of that you got. And I could
we didn't hear anything. Give us the 2 numbers quick on Eric first, then Pat.
All right, Eric 3.
Damn.
I can't. I mean.
It's true. I mean, what you're going to say is 100% true. We have the facts. We have the unfortunate receipts.
We have 2 years of playoffs.
I went 7.
There's no way I can. I can't. Like 3 is, and I think I'm being generous with 3. Like, actually, no. Give me a 1. I can't trust Bledsoe because I don't know what Bledsoe's going to show.
And then Pat's going to get an 8.
I'm going with a 1 because I don't know what the hell I'm going to get with him. And if he shows up, great. I'll be happy about it. But if he doesn't show up, I will not be surprised in the least. So Bledsoe, give me a 1. Connaughton, give me a 4. I guess he's going to come in. He might hit a couple shots. He's going to fly by on a pump fake. I don't love it. So, yeah, give me a 4 with Pat Connaughton. I don't know what he does that George Hill and Dante don't do better than him, so I don't even expect him to play much of the playoffs in general.
That's great. Fair enough. Thank you for weighing in. The Bledsoe take was needed. we needed someone to say it, so thank you for doing that. All right, we're gonna move on to the last part. We're skipping rapid fire this week. I wrote some questions, but they suck, so we're gonna move on. So we're gonna go
rapid fire last week either. Whoops.
Yeah, we're gonna go straight into Vulture talk. All right, take it away, Riley.
It's some good stuff this week, and by good stuff I mean it's Stephen A. Smith. And by good stuff from Stephen A. Smith, I mean it's totally unintelligible. We didn't get any sort of direct report that a specific team has hired one of Giannis's father figures, that they're looking to hire one of his father figures. I think there's potential that could still happen because there's a lot of father figures out there that teams are going for. But this week, it just came from Stephen A. Smith. I don't know if it was on a panel on an ESPN program. All I know is that it was some sort of discussion with Jackie McMullen. She asked something about, in the current NBA, do stars even want to stay in small markets? How we haven't already hashed this out a million times over the past 2 decades, I have no idea. But it was the question that was posed. And Stephen A. Smith was there, and he jumped in and said, I've heard that if the Bucks don't make the finals, Giannis is leaving. He started with that, and then he followed up with, I don't know if that's true or not. And so that's the report that we have out there. We have no idea if it's true or not, but it might be true or it might not be true that if the Bucks don't make the finals, Giannis might or he might not leave. So that's where we're at. That's where the media is at. That's the feelers beginning is. We don't know, but we're going to say that maybe it may or may not happen. So really, it's the entire the entire season's Vulture talk brought into one. It's the perfect distillation, really, if you think about it. Of
really
what this discussion is. It's people speculating. It's people saying that I've heard from this shadowy figure that I'm not going to reveal because the shadowy figure was myself in a mirror in the dark, and I was talking to myself. So that's the source. And so the source can't be proven as right or wrong because nobody besides maybe we talked about this even a year ago. Giannis talks to 4 people max. That's his crew does not run deep and they're almost all his family. And so anybody who claims that they know one thing or the other, I think is disingenuous and a lot of hot air, which is cool because you got to do what you got to do for the clicks, but not impressive from Stephen A. this past week, in my opinion.
not impressive. He gave us the distillation of everything Vulture Talk's ever been. I think that's why he gets paid the big bucks.
Yeah,
he
well,
says we don't need to say.
Well, the thing is, the distillation of the Vulture Talk, it was shown to be super lame and totally unnecessary. So in a way, I'm trying to compensate for the fact that this whole exercise I do every week is for naught and totally worthless because nobody has a clue. But, I just resent Stephen A. for pulling the mask off completely and revealing myself to be the fraud that I am when trying to cover this. So it's not me hating Stephen A. It's me hating myself through Stephen A. So.
Well, we appreciate you doing it, Riley. We appreciate Vulture Talk. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna just go ahead. Look at the Bucks slate ahead. We're recording this before the Suns. The Bucks play the Suns. So by the time you listen to this, you'll know the result of that. But it worked out pretty well for us last time before we recorded before a Suns game. Bucks won. So they are at Phoenix on Sunday, at Denver on Monday. That's a back-to-back. Obviously, Thursday, big game matchup at home against the Celtics, and then Saturday they face off against the Golden State Warriors at home with Stephen Curry returning. We'll see if he's out for injuries or something from that night. Hopefully not. But what's your prediction for the week, Kyle?
I'm really deciding, do I want to go 2-2 or 1-3? And I think that's mainly because I might go 1-3. Wait, actually, hold on. Yeah. No,
you changed it. Like, I'm going to go 4-0.
No, 2-2. I don't know why I thought, okay, I don't know. 2-2. I think they beat Phoenix, and I think they beat the Warriors. I just do not feel confident about Denver on the road. And without Giannis, I don't know if they can beat the Celtics without Giannis at home. I know Chris Middleton will do his thing, but I just can't. I don't know. And this is all dependent on how George Hill comes back. If he can come back, I feel a little bit better about the Bucks against the Celtics than I would have otherwise. But if he's not at 100% or if he's out, yeah, I'm going to go 2-2 with losses to Denver and the Celtics.
I'm going to go – I don't want to go 0-4 because that seems a little extreme, obviously. I would say 1-3. They beat Phoenix today because there's still enough of a talent differential. But Denver is really, really good. The Celtics, they're maybe a little bit more of a question just because I know they've been dealing with injury issues, so maybe they'll also be down a couple of guys, but they're a tough out. And the Warriors, I mean, I think Curry's going to try and ascend to prove definitively to Giannis that he should come to Golden State. And so between those three, I think it's going to be a 1-3 week. And I think the difficulty as well is doing that adjustments for on a more permanent basis, not on a one game off basis of trying to figure out what's the best strategy here without Giannis, assuming that, again, he's going to be out for maybe a week or two or even longer. So 1-3 for me.
All right, I'm going to go 3-1. I think they lose at Denver. It's really hard to win at Denver, especially on a back-to-back. And then really the only game I have a question mark about is that Celtics game. And it's at home. I don't know. I think I believe in the Bucks, even if Giannis does happen to be out. I'm going to trust the Bucks. 3-1. So
famous last words.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough look for me. Trust Eric Bledsoe and 3-1 for the Bucks. I'm going down in flames. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. This has been the Brew Hoop Podcast. Make sure to go to brewhoop.com for all of our typical written content as well. The usual Monday morning media roundup from Riley, Brian's 5 observations, whatever insightful article Mitchell happens to write. He had a good one last Friday about trying to tune out all of the Giannis noise. So definitely go and read that. But otherwise, subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends, like our page on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at BrewHoop, and we will be back with you again next week. Thank you for listening.